The next day, Barav and Scroll entered Roland's office together. Roland, with concern, inquired about the recent explosion. Fortunately, no one was fatally injured in the incident. However, a few people suffered fractures due to falls during the evacuation, and several others had minor burns, but all were healed and recovered thanks to Nanawa's treatment. Upon hearing the explosion, the teachers immediately halted what they were doing and helped with the evacuation. Ferlin was the first to react, among them, claimed that it was a mock enemy raid by the First Army as part of a drill, advising the students not to panic. This steadied the situation on site, and injuries were limited to the one class that witnessed a witch's awakening. Roland couldn't help but praise Ferlin for using the First Army's immense prestige in the city of Neverwinter to maintain order and reduce panic. He was also pleased to know that Agatha rushed to the school immediately and used her powers to extinguish the flames, saving the main academic building from disaster. Regarding how Roland planned to deal with the incident, he wanted to hear the opinions of the two first. Barav thought for a moment and then said that he believed the key issue was not the bullying itself, but the regional conflict behind it. One of the groups came from Golden Wheat City in the eastern region, previously under Timothy's control, which has not yet surrendered. Barav suspected that the adults behind them were labeling the area as a traitor's land, which the children wouldn't have known otherwise. He concluded that the parents of those who initiated the conflict should be strictly punished, and such conflicts should be eradicated as soon as possible. Regarding the potential danger to the public caused by the awakening of a witch, he suggested this should also be included in the laws. Roland nodded in satisfaction. He was pleased that Barav had first identified the underlying cause behind the fight, showing significant progress over the past 2 years. However, he didn't think Barav's solution was the best approach. Then, Roland turned to Scroll to hear her thoughts. She offered a different perspective. The citizens of Neverwinter came from all over Greycastle. It was clear to her that incorporating every conflict into the law was not a sustainable solution. She believed it was more important to guide the people, teaching them what was right and what was wrong and not to discriminate against people based on where they are from. As for the public impact caused by the awakening of a witch, Scroll suggested that Roland consult with Agatha and the Takira witches. They would be more familiar with such situations. Roland picked up his teacup and took a slow sip. He recognized that this conflict was merely a basic regional dispute. He believed it was better to propagate the idea that everyone belongs to the same group and that the rebels are just a small group with ulterior motives. This message should be incorporated into educational materials, as it's better than simply forbidding discussions on the subject, which could increase regional divisions. Regarding the relationship between witches and ordinary people, he decided to first hear about Takira's approach. Roland resolved to treat this incident as a common brawl. The student who injured the witch with a chair was to pay for both their medical expenses, with the witches' union covering the injured party's costs. The repair of the school building was to be expedited. Additionally, future preventive measures should follow Scroll's suggestion, using public opinion to guide the citizens. Both Barav and Scroll nodded in understanding. As for the newly awakened witch, Roland instructed Scroll to tell her to rest for a few days to calm her emotions and asked Wendy to keep her company. During the afternoon, when Wendy learned of the new witch's awakening, she was thrilled. Carrying a bento box into the medical center, Wendy saw Nanawa's father talking with a couple. From the distance, it looked like the couple wanted to bend their knees as if to kneel but were stopped by Mr. Pine. After that, they bowed several times before leaving reluctantly. Wendy curiously asked who they were. Mr. Pine explained they were the parents of the little witch, worried about leaving their child alone. However, upon learning that the kid's stay was ordered by the king, they quickly expressed immense gratitude towards the king. Mr. Pine's tone carried a mix of regret and pride as he spoke. Wendy chuckled, remarking that not everyone could dare to storm a lord's castle for their daughter as he did. This reminded Wendy of Summer's parents. She let out a sigh. Then looking at the departing witch's parents, compared to Summer's parents, she thought these parents actually cared about their daughter. Brushing off the snow from her coat, Wendy then entered the medical center. Back with Roland, Agatha, and Phyllis entered the room. Agatha expressed her concern about the situation of witches awakening in Neverwinter. There had only been one witch awakened in the past year, a fraction of the rate during Takira's era. With the Third Divine War approaching and magical energy becoming more active, the number of awakenings shouldn't be this low. After consulting with Takira's witches, it seemed that some factor was affecting the awakening of new witches, and it was a growing trend. In this world, magical power fluctuates, becoming more abundant as the red moon approaches, followed by a period of scarcity. However, currently, despite the active magical power, new witch awakenings were rare in the city. Roland pondered for a while, then asked if there was a way to identify this factor, assuming their speculation was correct. Both witches looked at each other and shook their heads. Seeing this, Roland smiled and said, "Well, let's just assume the gods are on vacation. Anyway, they still have to defeat the demons." Phyllis seemed surprised by Roland's unwavering confidence in combating the demons, even after knowing about this news. She thought for a moment, then nodded in agreement. Roland then asked about the potential dangers of witch awakenings in Takira's era and how they were handled. Phyllis explained that at that time, everyone understood the half-hour rule. Simply put, there were precursors to a witch's awakening. Magical power would start to accumulate, lasting about half an hour. Symptoms like abdominal pain and discomfort would appear. The witch had to shout out about her impending awakening, prompting everyone to immediately retreat away from her. If anyone stayed and got injured afterward, they wouldn't be compensated. However, if the witch failed to loudly announce, she would face punishment as well. Roland thought this approach was good, provided everyone was familiar with witches. It also promoted the idea that witches were born among humans, making it clear that any young girl could potentially awaken as a witch at any time. This reminded Roland of modern traffic rules, such as traffic lights. The best course of action for everyone was to follow these rules to avoid harm. With this in mind, Roland immediately began drafting legislation concerning the conduct of witches. Back at the medical center, which had been modernized following Roland's renovations, Nanoa was accompanying the new witch. Mr. Pine opened the door and gestured for Nanoa to join him for lunch. Upon seeing Wendy, Nanoa greeted her cheerfully. Realizing Wendy's intention with the lunchbox, she said goodbye to the new witch and left with her father. Wendy approached the bed, set the lunchbox on the cabinet, and asked the new witch, Sharon, about her feelings about becoming a witch. Sharon, with her pink short hair and rosy eyes, looked adorable. She touched her stomach and mentioned feeling something extra inside her, which Nanoa had explained was a magical power. Sharon, looking at Wendy, inquired if she was also a witch and whether the first experience was always painful. Although the statement seemed ambiguous, Wendy knew exactly what she meant. Wendy introduced herself and assured Sharon that once she learned to control her magic, it would become a part of her. Wendy opened the bento box and handed the steaming food to Sharon, who eagerly began to eat, her stomach growling loudly. The sight of the delicious bento box instantly cheered Sharon up. Wendy thought about the king's tradition of hosting a banquet for new witches and realized the power of using food to stabilize emotions. Sharon quickly finished her meal, leaving not a single grain of rice. Wendy handed her a cup of water and some napkins. After Sharon wiped her mouth, Wendy asked if her friend had returned home. Sharon shook her head, unsure of her whereabouts. Wendy was surprised. Didn't the girl come to see Sharon? Sharon explained that like the bullies, she too was from the south, and perhaps the girl didn't trust her much. Wendy had assumed Sharon was from the east, which is why she helped her. Sharon, chewing on a piece of dried radish, earnestly said that regardless of where they came from, the noble squabbles had nothing to do with them. The bullies were just that, bullies. What's wrong is wrong, and if Sharon hadn't stood up, no one would have corrected the mistake. Wendy was stunned for a moment, taking a while to recover. She didn't say anything, just thought to herself that Roland might have been overthinking. This little girl didn't need anyone's comfort. Seeing the determination in the girl's eyes, Wendy knew Sharon had no regrets about her decision. The following afternoon, Roland received Sharon's ability report. Wendy recounted the previous night's meeting with a smile. Sharon not only accepted her new identity as a witch but also expressed her desire to join the witch union and become someone like Nanoa. Roland looked at Sharon's report with satisfaction. She was 15 years old, with her magical power ranked above average. The report even noted that her level was comparable to some of the adult witches from Takara's era. It seemed that Phyllis was also present during the ability test. She was always the most enthusiastic whenever a new witch appeared. Sharon's ability was to generate electricity, but she still lacked precise control. When she increased the intensity of the current, her magical power consumption rapidly escalated, yet she could easily penetrate wood and melt metal objects. She could light up a bulb, but often burnt out the filament quickly. However, her power transmission was not very strong. Roland nodded in approval. Sharon had great potential. He looked forward to seeing the evolution of her abilities after she gained more knowledge and how she would improve as she became older. Roland approved Sharon's entry into the Witch Union, encouraging her to practice her abilities while focusing on her studies. Considering Sharon's strong sense of justice, Roland thought it might be a good idea to have her join the Department of Justice. A young girl with the ability to generate electricity, patrolling the streets and ready to apprehend criminals at any moment, seemed like a strangely familiar scenario. After Wendy finished reporting her work and returned to the witch's building, she suddenly heard the sound of flapping wings behind her. It was Maisie, cooing anxiously. Seeing Maisie's distressed state, Wendy became worried and quickly asked what had happened. Lightning soon arrived and instructed Maisie to find Nightingale and Roland immediately. Maisie flew towards the castle, while Wendy and Lightning hurried to the bottom of the witch's building. Suddenly, a multitude of mushrooms flew out of the building, hitting them on their heads. They quickly climbed the stairs, only to see Lily and Rem blocking the door, which was nearly bursting with mushrooms. Lily, pale-faced, admitted that the mushrooms were spawned by her magic. Everyone looked at Lily, wondering if her powers had evolved. Just when the situation seemed dire, Anna and Nightingale arrived. Nightingale drew her dagger to break the door, while Anna swiftly used her power to eradicate all the mushrooms in the room with her black fire. Roland, looking at the mushrooms in his hand, understood that Lily's previous observations of the mushroom spores had led to this. Lily thought she was in trouble and would be scolded, but Roland gently ruffled her hair and praised her work. Surprisingly, Lily did not shy away or roll her eyes but accepted Roland's compliment with a blushed face. Roland then smiled and suggested, "Let's have a mushroom feast for lunch today." In the distant most southern territory, flames erupted from beneath the earth, creating a world starkly different from the cold desert outside. Andrea remarked on the intriguing nature of this place, but Ashes dismissed it as feeling like a steamer. Andrea shrugged off Ash's lack of taste and style, to which Ashes nonchalantly suggested Andrea wipe the sweat off her face before boasting. As they bickered, Tulamu, after a week of acquaintance, had gained some understanding of this group. The two goddesses in front of him were incredibly powerful. Tulamu also agreed with Andrea that they were in the most beautiful part of the southern territory, the eternal sea of fire. Echo also found it beautiful, wishing it could be enjoyed without conflict and bloodshed. Hummingbird chimed in and said, just as Roland had said once, making it famous as a national natural park. Andrea lifted her chin in agreement, remarking on Roland's king-like vision and his great taste, which Ashes naturally took as another opportunity for some teasing. As the team continued onward, Tulamu, at the back, was curious about the name Roland, frequently mentioned in conversations by both Axe and the goddesses. He wondered how this king had earned such trust and respect. When the group reached the high platform, the clan warriors waiting there hissed, while onlookers from other major clans looked on indifferently. Tulamu was undisturbed, knowing all present clans were about to become history. The chief of the first clan stood and called the chief of the Asha clan to answer. Echo took a deep breath and stepped forward, followed by the other witches. Recognizing Echo, who had previously participated in the scarce duel, the first clan's chief skipped the rules explanation. They were to battle the Swogo clan, fielding 22 warriors. Weapons racks were placed on both sides of the platform for duelists to choose from. Ashes, initially holding her great sword, was informed by Tulamu that personal weapons were not allowed in the duel. She casually stuck her blade into the ground, shattering a large chunk of the hard rock. Tulamu thought to himself that she hadn't used her full strength, otherwise, his tavern would have been demolished barehanded. Ashes glanced at the weapons, asking how many she could take. Upon learning she could take as many as she wanted, she first placed 2 daggers at her waist, then picked up a long 2-handled iron hammer and a wooden shield. Eyeing the heaviest 2-handed hammer on the rack, Ashes wielded it effortlessly with one hand, making Tulamu realize the opponent was doomed. Andrea casually picked a short bow, intentionally reducing the arrows in the quiver to 22, discarding the extra. Axe also chose a suitable long sword, staying close to Echo for protection, while Ashes and Andrea took the front lines. Hummingbird didn't join the fight. For them, 4 was enough. According to the rules, the number of warriors participating in the duel from each clan should be between 15 and 30, and the challengers could not outnumber the challenged clan. The opponents were the strongest and most belligerent warriors selected by their clans. Tulamu was somewhat worried, as the opponents would surely be wearing the Stone of God punishment. Seeing the 4 of them so confident, Tulamu suddenly felt a pang of regret. The first clan looked at the group, asking if they were sure they only wanted to use 4 people. Ashes smirked at the corner of her mouth, urging them to stop talking and start the fight. Once the gong hanging at the corner of the platform was struck, the first battle commenced. As the command was given, the Swogo clan's warriors immediately drew their weapons. They converged from both sides of the platform. Suddenly, their steps halted, as everyone heard a mournful and melodious song. The tune was ethereal and pleasant as if coming from the distant sky, but the embedded feelings of loss, pain, and mourning were so intense that it involuntarily brought tears to the listener's eyes. This caused the Swogo warriors to pause. The spectators' expressions changed drastically, some pointed at the Swogo clan and shouted accusations, while others covered their faces, crying as if encountering something profoundly tragic. There were screams, shouting, and cursing, all directed at the Swogo clan. Tulamu could hardly believe his eyes, as he had no idea what was going on. He saw the Swogo warriors turn on their own people, and in an instant, the observation platform was splattered with hot blood. Blades pierced through their bodies, and heads rolled off the platform, their faces filled with shock and disbelief. Accompanied by the sad music, it was almost like a narration of the astonishing slaughter. However, it lasted only a moment. When he blinked again, the horrific scene before him had vanished without a trace. The 22 warriors were still advancing, but their steps were significantly slower. Tulamu was still trying to comprehend what had happened when Andrea swiftly drew several arrows. Instead of using a bow, she flicked them with a light toss, and the warriors immediately fell. They were all incapacitated but not fatally wounded. Tulamu was astounded. Her hand-thrown arrows were as effective as those shot from a fully drawn strong bow. Each arrow pierced right below the collarbone on the right side, lodging in the bones. The song echoing across the platform suddenly shifted from its previous mournful tune to an uplifting and vigorous rhythm, with tight drumbeats that seemed to strike at the heart, igniting a fiery passion in the listeners. Ashes moved into action, effortlessly maneuvering despite carrying a massive hammer and wooden shield. No one could withstand her strike. She didn't crush her opponents to death but merely knocked them unconscious. Suddenly, a severely injured clan warrior got up, grabbed a short bow and an arrow tipped with a Stone of God punishment, and shot it at Echo. Andrea and Ashes had underestimated the enemy, and it was too late to defend. Suddenly, a large hand grabbed the arrow in midair and threw it to the ground, crushing it underfoot. Tulamu, however, felt a pang of regret, lamenting that an arrow was worth almost dozens of gold coins. Realizing their opponent was too strong, one of the warriors bellowed, gathering the remaining 10 or so who could still stand around him. They all noticed that Ashes had no intention of killing them. The warriors sheathed their weapons and lined up, extending their hands forward and pushing onto each other. Their intention to settle the contest through a test of strength was clear. Ashes smiled casually, dropped her wooden shield, raised her long-handled iron hammer, and charged at the group. The two forces collided with tremendous force. Chaotic cheers erupted from the spectators' platform, as the crowd rooted for both sides. Ashes alone withstood the push from a dozen men. A cloaked young girl in the audience chuckled, finding the scene interesting. When Axe, Andrea, and Echo joined the tug-of-war, the balance was disrupted. The 4 of them pushed against the dozen warriors, slowly advancing step by step toward the edge of the platform. Finally, the opposing side was sent flying off and landed on the ground. The Swoga clan acknowledged they had just lost, but it was good that no one died. The victors were naturally the Asha clan. The next scene brings us inside the Iron Sand City. In a training field, the sound of thump resonated as a girl relentlessly pounded a punching bag with the force of a hammer. Upon closer inspection, her arms resembled those of a wild beast. A middle-aged man walked in, smiling, and asked if the girl was excited by the Asha clan's performance. Just a few minutes earlier, the chief of the first clan had come by, informed by the guards that Lorca was practicing. As the chief was about to enter, the guard hurriedly mentioned that Lorca did not want to be disturbed. Hearing this, the chief glanced at him, causing the guard to shiver. The chief was not angry, rather, he felt relieved. Lorca was becoming more authoritative, a true heir to the clan. Entering the tent, the training hall had a row of iron bars, and his daughter was striking a hanging sandbag with powerful punches. He had no doubt that such a punch, if landed on a person, would cause severe internal damage. Under her full strength, the sandbag eventually burst. She let out a breath, her beast-like hands slowly returning to normal as she nodded at her father. The chief smiled, realizing his daughter saw Asha's performance as finally having a worthy opponent. The girl pouted, feeling it was a pity because the other party had just won the right to stay in Iron Sand City and would probably not challenge again for a while. Lorca sighed and was about to leave the tent when the chief asked if she preferred chatting with the sandbag over talking with her father. Her ears perked atop her head, trembled as if admitting guilt, and then drooped. The chief coughed twice, reminding her to watch her expressions. Lorca immediately perked up her ears, and the chief thought to himself that, despite her cute appearance, he really wanted to rub her hair, but it wasn't suitable for a clan leader. A future clan leader should always maintain seriousness, commanding respect and obedience from subordinates. He then asked for her thoughts on the duel. The girl simply said that apart from Ashes, it wasn't very interesting. The chief disagreed, pointing out that the abilities of the other side were quite interesting, and it was very rare to see no casualties. Even the Swogo clan wouldn't harbor any hatred towards the Asha clan. Lorca, however, was skeptical, believing that Echo's trick would not work a second time. She also thought that Asha's approach, though respect-worthy, was asking for trouble. She predicted they would soon be challenged by another clan. The chief patted his daughter's shoulder, happy to hear that she prioritized the clan's interests, a quality essential for a clan leader. Just then, a guard from outside the training hall hurried in, and reported that the Asha clan had issued another sacred duel. The chief was startled, it had only been a day since they won the right to stay in Iron Sand City. He asked who the challenge was against, and the guard replied it was the 4th-ranked Sandstorm clan. Moreover, the Asha clan hadn't forced the Swoga clan to leave or take residence in Iron Sand City themselves, puzzling the chief about their intentions. Lorca was silent for a moment, then laughed lightly, realizing a chance to face Ashes might not be so far off. A few days later, at night, at the tavern, here became the liveliest place in the little oasis. Everyone discussed the recent sacred duel. The Sandstorm clan had a goddess who could turn sand into armor and manipulate it to attack, but she was defeated by a single punch from Ashes. Many had witnessed this scene. The moment Ashes charged, the sand enveloping the Sandstorm clan's goddess scattered, and she was knocked out with one punch. They believed Ashes had held back, otherwise, her opponent would have been killed instantly. The tavern's patrons speculated whether Ashes also carried a stone of god punishment. But everyone knew Ashes was a goddess, so, what really happened? The patrons in the tavern asked the waiter not to interrupt, as the man continued his story. He said the Sandstorm clan probably didn't expect their goddess to be the first to fall, which immediately disrupted their formation. And yet again, they were defeated without casualties. 15 people, all survived, either shot in the shoulder or knee with arrows or knocked out by the goddess. Murmurs and whispers rose among the crowd. The storyteller, getting into the climax, says that wasn't it, as he stood on a stool and proclaimed that the duel 2 days ago was unforgettable. The Asha clan challenged the Blackwater clan, a major clan known for its ferocity and brutality. Few challengers who faced them lived to tell the tale. They had no goddess but were all top-notch warriors, and they fielded a full 30. Compared to the previous fights, it was more of a bloody battle, but This but silenced the tavern, as everyone waited for him to continue. Despite disbelief, once again, no one died on the platform. Gradually, witnesses from the audience corroborated the story. At the height of the excitement, a wealthy patron looked towards the second floor of the tavern, instructing the owner to serve everyone a drink, and it would be on him. Tulamu laughed heartily. Instead of getting the patron to pay, he instead declared this round was on him and everyone had a share. Cheers erupted downstairs. Tulamu downed his drink in one gulp and exhaled deeply. Over the week, the number of patrons had increased tenfold, and the talk of sacred duels was incessant. Tulamu was told to stay in the oasis to manage the rear, and couldn't understand why Axe and the others allowed so many of these minor clans to gather here. Although everyone admired the Asha clan's policy of not killing, they worried that the opponents would simply recover and return for another challenge. Many felt that even if they wanted to be the first clan, such actions were pointless. However, tonight's duel against the second clan was the most anticipated. Some believed the Asha would lose, but others had great confidence in them. A middle-aged man sighed, lamenting that getting a spot to watch the duel live was becoming increasingly difficult, leaving them to wait for news in the tavern. Suddenly, a breathless messenger burst into the tavern. He didn't stop for a drink, his voice hoarse as he shouted, "The Asha clan won." The tavern erupted into a buzz of excitement. The patrons bombarded the messenger with questions about the duel. Tulamu relaxed, clapped his hands for attention, handed the messenger a drink, and asked him to describe what happened. After moistening his throat with the fruit wine, the messenger revealed that the two sides did not fight. Turned out, the second clan had conceded their position. The tavern fell eerily silent. Back with Axe, Echo was surprised that the other side had given up so easily. Axe understood their strategy. The second clan wanted to conserve strength, wait for the Asha to be weakened in a fight with the first clan, and then return to take the second place, or even become the first. Echo was relieved there hadn't been a fight, noting that Ashes had sustained several injuries in the recent continuous battles, especially against the Blackwater clan. Ashes entered, wearing a long gown, laughing that most of the bloodstains were from her opponents. Echo looked at her worriedly, asking about her injuries. Ashes moved her body a bit and reassured her with a smile, "It's nothing." Andrea had just applied some herbal medicine from leaf to Ashes, telling everyone that an extraordinary witch's body was naturally stronger than that of ordinary witches. After all, they didn't need to supply their brains with nutrients, so their muscles grew quickly, and their skin was particularly thick. Ashes rolled her eyes but, unlike usual, didn't argue with her and instead leaned back in the chair to rest. Axe looked at the two, then shifted his gaze to Ashes, thinking this was the behavior of a mature warrior. Besides eating and fighting, they used the rest of their time to rest and recover as much strength as possible. He remarked that the king had an excellent eye for choosing people. Their next steps were simple. As instructed by Roland, they just needed to start making a buzz, ensuring the whole desert knew about them, then creating topics of conversation. What remained was defeating the first clan, and then having Echo speak the king's words at the Sea of Fire in front of everyone. Echo fell silent for a moment, then clenched her fist as if to encourage herself and understand her role. Axe, noticing Echo's nervousness, reassured her not to worry or put too much pressure on herself. No matter how many responded to them, a new order would eventually spread across the entire southernmost territory. Just then, Tulamu entered the tent, bringing a letter. The first clan had responded to the Asha's challenge request, but they demanded specific participants in the duel. Andrea, surprised, asked what they meant. Tulamu respectfully replied that the letter stated the first clan's princess, Lorca, wished to have a one-on-one duel with Ashes on the platform of Burning Fire.